you for joining us for today's Ipsos webinar illustrating the timeliness of ensuring your pack and product designs are sustainable. Throughout today's session, you will remain in listen-only mode. However, throughout the webinar, you may submit questions online using the Q&A feature located on the right side of your screen. Time permitting, we'll answer questions at the end of today's session. However, if time runs short, then your question will be answered by email. Today's webinar is also being recorded and will be posted to our website within about 48 hours. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Britt Calvert, Director with Ipsos' Innovation Team. Britt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for a conversation on the impact of sustainability on your pack and product research. I also want to wish you all a happy belated Earth Day. I know a lot of us are probably working from home these days, so hopefully you've been able to pop outside and take in some Mother Nature to celebrate. First, we'd like to begin by introducing ourselves. So, as Ellen mentioned, my name is Britt Calvert, and I am a director within Ipsos' Innovation Service Line based in Chicago.
Hi, everyone, and I'm Ashley Erickson. I'm a vice president also with Ipsos' Innovation Service Line, and I also sit in Chicago.
So Ashley and I support our pack and product testing solutions, and we're excited to be talking about a topic that we both care a lot about as consumers, as fellow citizens, but also as researchers, given the impact sustainability is having on you as our clients and many aspects of your business, including, of course, pack and product. We'll start by talking a bit about the impact of the sustainability movement, what it means to consumers, what it means to corporations, insights professionals, and of course, pack and product developers. So we've seen a number of trends impact product and pack development over the years, but sustainability is without a doubt one of the biggest realities impacting our clients today. 86% of S&P 500 companies published sustainability reports for 2018, and when these numbers come out for 2019 later this year, we expect that only to have increased. Given the visibility around these actions, a number of companies have set major sustainability targets for the next decade. For instance, both PepsiCo and P&G are looking to significantly cut their use of virgin plastics over the next 5 to 10 years. By 2030, Unilever aims to cut the environmental footprint of their products in half, and Amazon is working towards 50% of their shipments being net zero carbon by the year 2030. So what's contributing to its increasing importance? Sustainability is part of an even larger macro trend we've been noting over the past few years, and that's a movement from a me to a we mentality. In essence, we all want to be part of something bigger. No longer are we just thinking about ourselves, but we're also thinking about our families, our communities, our broader society, and our world. I know we can see this very clearly as we're all currently navigating the uncertainties surrounding the global impact of the coronavirus pandemic. This current crisis has made us even more aware of the impact that our behaviors can have on others outside of our families and outside of our homes. The shift from me to we is a useful lens to think not only about sustainability, but also about pack and product innovation more broadly. We're seeing an increased tendency for consumers to consider products in the context of what's good for me, what's good for my world, but also what's good for the world more broadly. If your pack and product innovations resonate with people on all of these levels, plus they're able to deliver a satisfying usage experience, you're ultimately setting yourself up for success.
And sustainability is not only a challenge to individual consumers, of course, it's also a significant business challenge. It's one of ensuring long-term production capacity, and you want to certainly protect natural resources, but you have to also meet the growing demands of a global marketplace and numerous stakeholders. But ultimately, sustainability is big business. You may be aware of an Oxford University review. They looked at over 200 academic studies. And amongst those studies, they found that 88% of them showed that companies that adhered to social or environmental standards showed better operational performance, and 80% of the studies showed a positive effect on stock price performance. Furthermore, not only are sustainable companies doing better business, but Ipsos research has shown that regardless of industry, companies that are perceived to be socially responsible are also the most highly trusted companies. So it's no longer sufficient for companies to simply be good at what you do, it's also how you do it. So of course the question becomes, how do we best demonstrate our social responsibility? And this is exactly why we're talking today. We know that pack and product development are in a uniquely strong position to lead your sustainability strategies. So your packaging and products are the physical manifestations of your sustainability goals, the ones we can hold, we can see them, use, or consume them in our daily lives. So these are the things that physically demonstrate how you are living your promises and allow us as consumers to experience sustainability firsthand. And your pack and product experiences also become another avenue for the story you tell via your brand positioning, so they can serve to communicate your sustainability message. And finally, the physical experiences and that brand story ladder up to impact the overall, quote, good impact you have in society. In other words, your corporate reputation. And with that, let's dig in to discuss several sustainability trends that Britt and I are seeing that commonly impact manufacturers and clients we're working with, and how we're flexing our pack and product research to deliver sustainable insights.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a bit about the forces driving towards clean product formulations, changing consumer preferences as related to the types of materials being used in packaging, as well as the overall amount of packaging consumers say they want to buy. We'll also talk about how sustainability is driving brands to create new product forms, which in turn drive alternate consumer behaviors. But first, we're going to discuss how to determine whether green really means go. So generally, we find that sustainability-based packaging initiatives tend to test fairly well. People, of course, want to do their best for the planet. So for instance, we asked over 2,000 US-based consumers how they would perceive food packaging that included these different green labels. And in all of the cases, the majority of respondents were more favorable towards these products than they would be towards products without any such claim. Given we see high agreement across the board, yet the majority of consumers aren't choosing sustainable options when they're shopping, this suggests something that all of us as researchers and insights professionals already know. There's a definite gap between what consumers say and what consumers do. So keeping that in mind, how do we get to the root of the matter? We have found that focusing on behavior in our research is essential for getting closer to consumers' true reactions and avoiding that say-do gap trap. So core to our philosophy is the idea that no choice is made in a vacuum. Regardless of where your consumers are shopping, they have plenty of choices for each product they buy. Sometimes you'll be stacked up against other sustainable products, and sometimes you won't be. And ultimately, your success comes down to whether people actually buy your SKU rather than their intent to purchase. We lean on our expertise in innovation and shelf research to use metrics that predict these outcomes, including shopping exercises that are shown to be highly predictive of actual in-store sales data. However, we understand that research is not a perfect proxy for the shopping experience, but there are ways that we can consider some of the psychological pressures that consumers might be under when shopping in order to produce more realistic results. For instance, when we're shopping, we're distracted. I think this is true now more than ever as we want to get in and out of stores quickly. We might not stop to consider which bottle of surface cleaner is the most eco-friendly. We just need it to do its job. And as a result, a questionnaire focused just on your design may overinflate the attention that shoppers are placing on your pack. The way that we remedy this is to include cognitive loading exercises throughout our surveys so that respondents are simultaneously focused on other tasks, which encourages them to lean more on gut reactions rather than overthought responses when rating stimuli. In that same vein, we know that not everything speaks to everyone. There might be some social bias when it comes to green labeling that encourages people to pay lip service to these terms. And one way that we seek to cut through this is by incorporating response time to understand whether respondents are truly convicted to these ideas or rather they're just agreeing with them because they feel like they should. In addition, we know that location matters a lot. While people might be able to touch and feel your compostable packaging in person, you have to do more to sell it online. This is something to consider as we know many of you to be accelerating your e-com strategies as more and more consumers are shopping online now as a result of COVID-19. Your method of testing should, of course, reflect your learning objectives as consumers look for different cues and different information when making purchases in-store versus online. In addition, we rely on device-agnostic methods, allowing consumers to do research in any setting that's natural to them. For our next trend, we will shift gears from packaging to focus on clean product formulations.
Thanks, Britt. So Britt talked about how sustainability impacts purchase behavior, but now we're going to take a look at how sustainability is impacting the physical formulations that you're creating and how our research must flex as a result. And again, we'll look at this in the context of a trend around clean formulations and technology. Now, we know the consumer desire for clean is strong, but what does that execution look like for you in the marketplace? And how do you ensure the end product provides a satisfying experience beyond just the feel-good experience? Now, developing within the clean space is a complex balance of push and pull dynamics that certainly impact how we must validate the products in our research. Now, first and foremost, we know, again, the consumer desire or the pull for clean is quite strong, and it continues to grow. It's moved beyond just food and beverages to include beauty, cleaning, even garments and textiles. We see this movement everywhere. Consumers are also becoming far more educated on what clean means to them and to our planet. So terms like clean and green are not necessarily sufficient anymore. Consumers want transparency and they want information. Then we also have the push from policymakers, including the EPA and the FDA, that in some regards are reacting to consumer interest, but they're pushing more regulation to ensure cleaner formulations and manufacturing processes. And finally, you have your own manufacturing feasibility, and it can be limited by your capabilities or ingredients that are available, and of course cost constraints come into play as well. But all these factors go into deciding if, when, and or how you may want to pursue clean formulations. Another really important variable that comes up quite often in the conversations that Britt and I have with you and your colleagues is around the associated communication strategy. Now, as noted, consumers are becoming more educated. They're looking for information in this space. So it's not only about what you do, but what you say and where and how you say it that will impact you as you work to execute clean. Now, we've seen a lot of renovations and innovations in the clean space over the years, and we don't really expect this trend to decline in the near future. And over the years, we've learned a few lessons, and we wanted to share some of those lessons as it impacts you and how you think about your clean strategies as well. First, we mentioned consumer desire. We know that the desire is broad. Millennials and boomers care, so it's not just about millennials, it's not just about Gen Z, it's about broad interest. But the desire for clean may be different depending on those generations. They might desire different specific executions. Also, noticing clean ingredients and technology can certainly help your key measures, but the product ultimately still must perform at its must-be or cost of entry benefits. So if it's a cleaning product, it's got to clean well. Foods and beverages, they need to taste great. Now, the positive impact of clean can also differ by the category or the product type. For instance, you can, quote, earn a larger positive halo effect if you're in a category that has permission to be clean. So just as a simple example, if you're looking to clean up, let's say, a juice product, you might get a bigger bang for your buck in that space than if you were looking to, quote, clean up a carbonated soft drink. Again, how you execute clean might be a little bit different, might be perceived differently in those two spaces. And this can have implications for if and how you communicate. Consumers also tend to look at the back of pack information for innovations more so than for existing products. Again, this can have implications for new launches, but also this has important implications if you're considering if or how your current customers might be impacted by a change to a product they love. So again, different implications for innovations and renovations. And related, clean positioning or on-pack claims on the front of the pack can drive more people to look at the back of the pack information. So you need to think about if and what to communicate on pack in a transparent way, as educated consumers will make connections between what lures them in on the front of the pack and again connecting that to the detailed information on the back. So in summary, clean is really a holistic experience. So much of what a person experiences about the products is impacted by what I want as an individual, what I'm told about the product, and the information I seek on pack, and ultimately the full product experience. So as a result, we know product research needs to be approached from a holistic standpoint in this clean space. And we're always looking to take into account the risk and reward of the business decisions you face in this situation. And we approach these opportunities by thinking again about the push from regulation and sustainability strategies, as well as the pull from consumers. So when we consult in this space and thinking about testing clean products, we use a framework to guide our consult. So we're always going to think about the stage of development because that has implications. We're going to think about who might be impacted by the change or this new offer. We're going to think about the context of the clean initiative, meaning what information people might experience in the marketplace and how they realistically experience that information. And of course, we'll discuss benchmarks. You know, are the benchmarks a quote clean benchmark or maybe a traditional benchmark, and what are the implications? Again, because we know the type and placement of communication is so important, we factor that in as well, along with quote green elements, so that we ensure we're acknowledging the unique role of this product in your portfolio and how it's working to implement your sustainability strategy. Now, just as there's a push and pull regarding clean formulations for products, we're seeing a similar trend for packaging materials.
Exactly, and this makes a lot of sense. So if we see the pack as a communicator of your brand and of your product proposition, it follows that the raw materials that make up your packaging can either contribute to or go against your larger goals as they're related to sustainability. So the biggest target of a lot of this heat as related to packaging is plastic, which tends to have a reputation for being less sustainable than other materials. Globally, close to 3/4 of consumers agree that single-use plastics should be banned as soon as possible, and we're seeing both private and public entities taking action in line with that consumer sentiment. For instance, San Francisco International Airport has already banned single-use plastic water bottles, and similarly, the EU is taking a stand against single-use plastic, to spark other government bodies to begin making comparable policies. Of course, not all plastic is created equal. In addition to single-use plastics being under fire, it's specifically virgin plastic, so plastic which has never been used or processed before, that tend to be seen as less desirable than other materials. As a result, brands are responding with other kinds of alternatives. So something closer in would be more eco-friendly plastics, such as recycled plastics or bioplastics. An example of this would be Coffee Chain Blue Bottle's compostable bioplastic cups. So notably, Blue Bottle is actually rolling out a pilot of a zero waste to go coffee program. So people are either going to have to bring their own coffee cup or pay a small deposit for reusable cups going forward. A little further out are paper-based or compostable options. These tend to be lined in some other material like plastic or aluminum, but cut down on the total amount of plastic used. So these packaging types tend to be efficient and easy to transport, but some consumers kind of take issue with how well these could potentially hold up and over time, especially in the face of liquids, which is potentially a barrier to overcome. So it's great to have options, of course, but we know we can't just throw a product in a more eco-friendly package and trust that consumers will have a positive response. Packages exist to provide a product, and if that product experience is compromised, or if people think that the experience will be compromised, it doesn't matter how green an alternative pack is, many consumers just won't buy in. So take, for instance, the backlash we've seen recently against plastic straws. Nearly half of U.S. consumers support a complete ban on them. The closest in replacement for paper or for plastic straws would, of course, be paper straws. They're cheap, they're accessible, they require no learning curve of consumers. However, any scan of media will show plenty of paper straw haters. While in theory they deliver the same benefits as plastic straws, they do so with some added pain points. They might warp or pucker during use. They definitely have a different sensory experience. I know I find them to be sometimes a little bit linty. Maybe they change the taste of what you're drinking. And that's not to say I am team plastic straw, but it is to say that it's important to get these new materials in the hands of consumers during their development, especially when they're not necessarily the category norm, to ensure that we're aware of any potential barriers to trial or to repeat. Take, for instance, a quick serve restaurant client of ours. They wanted to move away from plastic serviceware in their restaurants. Because of the scale of this change, we tested various design territories on a type of paper packaging in central location. We used polling technology to collect ratings of the designs in real time, and then selected consumers for focus groups in order to add some additional color to those quantitative findings. And while the ingoing objective was to quickly identify a design territory that was most appealing, and we did get that immediately from the quant data, because consumers were actually able to interact, touch, and feel with those prototypes, we learned that there was some concern about how the serviceware might compromise that taste experience. Based upon that feedback, we introduced a sturdier yet still compostable material into later sessions that day, which ensured that they hit the mark for both graphics as well as material. We truly believe that this type of hands-on research is essential when making a material change. So often by the time that we're testing with these prototypes with consumers, our clients have been locked into a packaging material or packaging process. So what if consumers hate it that far down the pipeline? To streamline the testing process, we partner with a company that does technical prototyping so we can bring together both consumer guidance and technical decisions. Working in parallel not only saves time and resources, but ultimately money. Haney is a packaging microfactory, and when we utilize their facilities for research, our clients reap the benefits of their resources, technologies, and raw materials, many of which are sustainable in nature. And this allows us the ability to learn and iterate in real time so that we land on an option that not only looks good to consumers, but just as importantly, feels right, while still meeting your necessarily technical specs, all under one roof. Okay, so we discussed how consumers are getting more prescriptive about the types of materials they prefer, but also increasingly have an opinion about the quantity of packaging that comes on the products they buy. And that opinion is that less is more. So taking a note from the larger trend of minimalism in general, consumers have a desire for less packaging. Our research shows that one of consumers' top environmental concerns is dealing with waste, and that's on par with global warming. And according to the EPA's latest report, containers and packaging are the single largest contributor to solid waste. It's about a third of the total waste in the U.S., which is huge. So what do we do? People say that they are ready to help the situation. The majority of consumers say that they'd prefer to buy products with minimal packaging, yet less than half of that same group would be willing to shake up their shopping routine to do so. It's no surprise to any of us that we want to have our cake and eat it too, but I guess some of us don't want to go to a new store to get it. Not all change is equal, of course, so let's look at a few examples of how different brands or categories are tackling this waste reduction issue. In some cases, the burden of change is primarily on the consumer. So one example of this would be bulk foods, and this is a way that for a long time now, grocery stores have encouraged consumers towards zero or lower waste options. More recently, however, subscription-based models, so for instance, Loop or Truman's, have popped up, which send low or zero waste options directly to consumers' homes. These, however, are super different business models. They're going to require a different upfront proposition in order to get consumers to try and hopefully commit. So as a result, they'll warrant a lot of conceptual exploration and, of course, a solid product experience. In other cases, however, the manufacturer can kind of help facilitate some easier adoption. Some examples of this are Pizza Hut's compostable pizza box, which is a nice reprieve from regular pizza boxes, which are kind of well known to be non-recyclable, or, for instance, refillable products. So refillable products are more prevalent in luxury sectors, but are slowly becoming more mainstream as a way to reduce the amount of waste consumers are creating with any given products they buy. All of these examples are fantastic for the earth, but I think we also need to keep in mind another essential thing that packaging has to do for this, and it's a communication vehicle. We all know the adage that to go unseen is to go unsold, and when we shrink the amount of space a package takes up on shelf, from a very practical perspective, it can just be harder to capture consumers' attention. So for instance, in the home care category, we're seeing quite a bit of downscaling. These are already some really crowded, really complex shelves. So if we were to have the size of a product, we could potentially have a real problem. How do we balance our desire to do good in this case with the very real reality that we still need to stand out on shelf? In this case, we have found that the key tends to be looking beyond just your pack to see kind of what conventions do or don't already exist in your category. To help illustrate this, we worked with our behavioral science center to evaluate whether a brand should cut the size of its bottle cap to reduce both the amount of plastic they're using as well as production cost. They began by auditing the category and found out that, as we would have imagined, decreasing the size of the bottle cap would likely result in less attention on shelf. But however, we know from our years of shelf testing experience that there are 4 kind of key primary variables driving shelf standout, and those are having a distinct branding element, differentiated and bright coloring relative to the rest of the category, having a unique shape, as well as offering an overall simple look. So with all of that in mind, we were able to offer really targeted, specific guidance to this client on how they would both be able to implement that cap size reduction, yet boost shelf standout in other ways by making tweaks to their current design. Our client did implement those suggestions, and we conducted some tests to validate that not only did the bottle retain its visual presence on shelf, but there was also no decline in the consumer's choice at shelf or any brand perceptions as a result of making these changes. So in addition to impacting the way products do or don't stand out at shelf, sustainability is also driving products' forms or service models to change, which in turn drives changes in our own behavior. That brings us to our final trend, which is the move towards alternate forms and business models, and how these push consumers towards new and different behaviors in some of the most basic areas of our lives.
Thanks, Bea. So as an example of digging into this trend a little bit more, we can think of the first example here we're showing. There are concerns over water scarcity at a global scale, and we also see concerns about shipping costs for water-based products. And this has led to the development of brands like Blue Land, which Britt had referenced earlier as well. So this is a subscription service where you can create your own cleaning solutions at home by dissolving the tablets in water in packaging that they provide you. So here's an example of a product that's not only impacting how you buy cleaning products, but also how you use them in your home, because it includes that make it yourself aspect, excuse me. And we can also think about the fashion industry. This is an interesting example where we're seeing a wave of new business models. Here there's an increased concern over the fast fashion movement, where huge amounts of garments are being thrown in landfills. And that's led to this slow fashion movement, where consumers can maybe go to a website, they create their own clothing, and that works to minimize overproduction of pieces, or manufacturers are sometimes encouraging customers to send back old clothing, and then the corporation will upcycle it into some new products. Again, here the model is pushing people to change their behavior, not only when it comes to purchasing, but maybe how they're using it and how they're disposing of it in terms of consuming their clothing. So ultimately, the ability for alternate forms or models to change our behavior really does matter. It's interesting, Unilever estimates that almost 70% of their greenhouse gas footprint depends on what we as consumers do and don't do. Depends on the products we choose and whether we use and dispose of them in a sustainable manner. So what does this, again, mean for our research? The implication here is that it's not only about the product or service performance. That's still critical, of course, and we've talked about that. But even more important is the entire holistic experience in a person's life. So can these new product forms or models, can they ultimately disrupt one's habits, our routines, our rituals? As such, alternate product forms often have an even higher hurdle for success, and that they need to change a huge part of what we do on a daily basis, and a large part of that is even unconscious. So we're finding that video is a really great tool for capturing a view of the ways in which new forms are or are not breaking through to impact, again, our habits and our routines. It provides a view into those micro behaviors that are so ingrained in our daily lives. And when we talk about video, we're really using it to dig into that say-do gap that Britt referenced earlier. And this is not about people just giving open ends, talking into their phones and giving open ends and using their camera. It's also about seeing the product experience. So we can certainly capture human behavior with phone videos. Again, we're all used to that. But we've also got wearable cameras and we've got mounted cameras as well. And in this case, video allows us to, again, move beyond structured quant ratings and our typical surveys and claimed behaviors. And instead, we can guide participants through tasks such as maybe unboxing the new product or this service. They can assemble it, they might make it, they're using it in their daily life or along with others in their household. I wanted to give a quick example of how we're using video to explore a sustainability initiative. Now, we're currently in the process of designing research to look at the impact of some new smart home technology that has sustainability benefits, including water and energy consumption. So we're actually exploring a three-phase approach in this case. So phase one would include some human factors engineering research to understand how people interact with the devices. So this phase would be conducted by our UX team, and they're skilled in guiding user-centered design. Okay, so this would be with fewer consumers really looking at how they interact with the devices. And then in phase two, the devices would be installed in consumers' homes. Not necessarily to understand the functionality, because we already had covered that in phase one, but this is to gain insight into the holistic experience. This is where video, including mounted videos that we would put in people's homes, would play a key role. So we're looking to see, do the devices solve pain points at key times in the day? Do they lead to consumer delight? Do they make certain tasks easier for the family as a whole? Ultimately, do they drive changes in behavior with respect to the energy and water consumption in their homes? And the final phase of the research would include a review by our B-side team as they can leverage their habit framework to identify successful behavior disruption. And in cases where the behavior was not changed, they can see if there's some positive feedback mechanisms that could be built into perhaps the devices themselves or the communication around the devices to reinforce behavioral change in people's daily lives. Okay? So now we've come to the close of our discussion today, and we hope that the content helps you consider how your research can better identify successful PAC and product-led sustainability initiatives. Now, as you explore and think about these opportunities for your own organizations, we hope that, based on today's conversation, you remember that methods must go beyond the physical pack and product. And while those are important, we absolutely need to understand consumer behavior. That includes what people might notice at shelf, and what they look for at shelf, what they buy, and how the entire experience serves to hopefully disrupt current behaviors and routines. And finally, when your pack and products can bring meaningful experiences to me, my world, and the broader world around me, That's when we know they will have a lasting impact for driving change. And with that, I wanted to see if there were any questions. So I know Britt is taking a look at some of the questions that may be coming in.
Yeah, and Ashley, our first one is related to product testing. Can you talk more about how or when to factor in communication when testing a cleaner product? Should we incorporate it even at guidance tests, as sometimes the comms plan isn't available that early?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this is exactly the type of questions and scenarios that come up quite often in that space. So this is where we always want to take into account the stage of development, first and foremost. So we recognize that oftentimes at earlier stages, there are different functions that are involved in the sustainability initiative. Again, there could be product developers, R&D. You're very much focused on product performance and perhaps, being held to certain constraints in terms of ingredients or manufacturing processes that you can or cannot include. So in that case, usually we like to put the product at the center. We want to focus on the product performance. And so if there is any type of communication, it could be a rough concept, it could be an idea or a proposition around this new or changed offer, we might save that and expose it to consumers at the end of the research. In that way, we can really focus on product performance in that guidance test phase. And at the end, we could expose all of our participants or different subsets to varying types of communication and gain some insight into how they're impacted by that. As we move through the development process, we certainly encourage our clients to bring that communication in a very natural way. So in some cases, that can be, quote, forcing the communication, because we know that many people will be exposed to it depending on how you're executing your communication strategy. In other cases, we don't want to force it. We want to let that communication happen naturally. So for instance, it might mean placing products with people in their homes, and maybe there's some on-pack communication on the front and or the back of the pack, and we allow consumers to experience it as they would naturally. Some people will notice, some people will not. But we've included it. And then on the back end, we can certainly ask some diagnostics to see if and how they notice. And this is a great case, too, where obviously pack and product come into play, because depending on how we're executing the research, we can even include some virtual shelves to represent how people might experience the communication strategy.
No, I think that's great, because we actually have another question that's, I think, kind of related in nature. Our communication plans have changed significantly as a result of current events, so ad spend as related to new launches is uncertain. How should we be thinking about assessing potential in these cases? So I'm taking that as kind of a more conceptual kind of question, more so than a product-related question, as you just addressed. But I think we would think about that very similarly, in that we tend to want to do our best to reflect whatever the real world scenario was going to be. And quite honestly, I think even prior to COVID-19, we were seeing a huge increase in a lot of this pack-cept or pack as concept type work. I think more and more there are a lot of blurred lines between the way we think of kind of pack testing and concept testing, as ads get shorter, marketing budgets get tighter, and the pack kind of has to do more and more heavy lifting. So I think Ashley brought up a lot of great points, but how we would guide you to test is ultimately going to depend on, of course, specific learning objectives, your marketing plan. But I think some considerations would always be things like your expected level of marketing support. We can incorporate different types of things, like, for example, the competitive set might differ, whether we're exposing people to a full concept or what we refer to as a tweetified concept, which kind of refers to a scaled back type of marketing support, or maybe that's just pack only, which I think is more commonly the approach that companies are taking for either closer in innovations or perhaps renovations that are focused on just sustainable methods. So when we're making kind of closer in innovations or kind of closer in changes to our packaging. We always, of course, want to think about the types of learnings you need, whether that's just design guidance and perhaps a light forecast versus a full market sizing, or I think something to consider here too is how far down the pipeline you are. But one thing I really do think that's important to keep in mind is we use consistent kind of KPIs regardless of whether we're testing packages or concepts for that very reason. We do know that those are questions that your teams are asking you, and as a result, we do think that a lot of the same things that drive the trial of a concept, where there is kind of explicit communication, would be driving the same things if the only communication is a package.
Thanks, Bea. I wanted to touch, I'm seeing one other question, and we have just a couple minutes. I think this is an interesting one, so I was just going to bring it up quickly. So someone was asking, how do you see these trends on sustainability changing with COVID-19 and a recession? And I think that's a great question. Britt and I are not necessarily experts on sustainability as a trend itself, but as we were preparing for this, and some of you may be aware, Ipsos has been doing a tremendous amount of research just in the space of COVID and impact on consumers on a local and global scale. So I know Ipsos has certainly been putting out some data that looks at the impact of COVID-19 on how consumers are feeling about sustainability. It's interesting, the concern remains quite strong. We have seen that people are noticing that with the regulations in place now as it relates to public health and safety, we're seeing a positive impact on the environment. Consumers are noticing that and saying that they would like to see that continue. They are again noticing that in this case, some governments have made changes that here it's directly impacted consumer behavior and again directly made a positive impact to the environment. So in some cases, they're hoping that some regulation like that could continue in the future in terms of environmental regulations for a positive impact. So it's interesting that we have not seen that decline. It was interesting, I was also talking to some B-side colleagues where this is presenting attention too for consumers, where I was exhibiting sustainability-related behaviors like bringing my reusable bags to the store, and now I can't do that. So there's a tension there between I want to do good for the earth, but I'm also working to do good for the people around me. So I think that can be an opportunity for innovation, though, because I think that push towards sustainable related behaviors in my own life still remains quite strong. The recession question is a really great one, and that one I have not seen data coming out of Ipsos yet on that topic. I think it's a really great one, though, because I think that will have certainly a lasting impact. Clearly, I think the sustainability, the desire for that movement will remain, but certainly we'll have to take into consideration what people are willing to spend for those, our common CPG goods. Now, I know we're out of time at this point. I do see some other questions. We always record those, and we will get back to you with some responses. And as Ellen said, this is being recorded, and we will post this to our website in the next 1 to 2 days. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate everyone taking the time, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.